Welcome back to It Tastes Like Burning. This Matt.
This Jesse.
We're going to introduce a guest here in a second, but we're going to go through the normal spiel. If you ever feel like reaching out to us, you can find us at ittasteslikeburningcast at gmail.com. You can find us on Patreon at It Tastes Like Burning. And always look for us on YouTube for It Tastes Like Burning. I do recommend entering the podcast on there. And we are on Twitter on ITLBcast. Jesse, what do we have in the grand scheme of things for today?
Well, we got Gene with us today. Hadn't had Gene around in a while, so
it's been a while.
It's been a hot minute, but
and he didn't know.
Yeah, so. Well, he showed up at the wrong. He showed up.
Y'all didn't warn me, is what it was.
You know what I just realized? An anagram is not what we were thinking it was. An anagram would be like car, arc, rack. A palindrome.
Palindrome, that's the word.
A palindrome
is race car.
Yeah, is race car, spelled forwards and backwards.
Yes.
So, congratulations on that epiphany.
Yeah.
And
and remember race car. and Hannah with an H on both ends, and what else? Mom.
Yeah. The list gets real short.
It gets real short after a while.
Anyways,
but yeah, so we this been a busy week, always a busy week. But Monday we had a ISO review.
Yeah, it was a minor thing.
Yeah, just something in a day in the life kind of deal, but interesting. I've been through a few of them through the years, a couple of different organizations, and probably more involved in this one than any other one I've ever been involved in.
Yeah, particularly the last, I'm going to say month, but realistically the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Is when you really dived in. So we're going to bounce around all over the place on this discussion today. And one unique purview on this is going to be Gene because of his career department. You are an ISO
1.
And the coveted and ever illustrious but elusive ISO 1.
Right.
And we'll talk a little bit about it. Pros and cons of being a 1. Pros and cons of working for your ISO. Some of the things you need to consider. Why you actually should consider an ISO review. And quite frankly, some of the things that's low-hanging fruit and some of the things that are really high-hanging fruit and I wouldn't worry about.
Right. And this is from the perspective of a volunteer, and I consider us true volunteer in the sense that we're not beds and bunks at the station. We're responding into the station. So how far can you take it being a non-staffed, right? We're not staffed in the conventional sense. Volunteer fire department. What can you do with that? And I think, Matt, you had the best analogy when we were sitting at the table there with the grader and everybody, and we were powwowing, and you said something about a box, right?
Oh, I make lots of analogies.
Yeah, so you're talking about ISO is this box, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the parameters are XYZ in this box, and it's up to you to figure out how to make what you're doing fit in that box. Don't change what you're doing to be different. Figure out how to make the data relevant to fit in that box, and
right.
how to organize things to where it fits into that box.
So ISO, they give you, if you actually read and you go through the document like preparing for it, you'll find that there's actually a lot of gray area. And it is up to the department to figure out how far you want to push the gray area. And what I want to highlight here is that they aren't going to sit there and just, it's not an algebra test. There is no exact answer. You have a lot of flexibility at how to determine what you want to qualify for those points.
Right.
And a good example of this, and this is talk about pushing the limits of the box. one of our neighboring automatic aid departments was visiting, and he's trying, and then he operates in a very rural area, and he has portable pumps on his tankers, and he has extra 2.5 inch hose, and the intent is to turn around and throw the uh, portable pump in a swimming pool and call that a static water source. Now the kicker is that a swimming pool technically has to have the ISO rep kind of stabbed back at him, and he asked, "Well, does this static water source have a 50-year drought survey on it?" Well, of course, the answer is no. And he's like, "But that's not part of what we're trying to fulfill. We're not, we are not trying to supplement the static water source. What we are trying to supplement is the flow rate to filling the truck on scene." And then the ISO rep, he kind of starts to fumble his hands together and gets a little sweaty. And I mean, that's pushing it right there. We're talking about stretching. That's how you stretch. But realistically, he needs to get some points at the end of the day out of that, because whether ISO likes it or not, he's actually able to provide and prove that through his flow rates on his truck, he can exceed the standard 3,000 gallons, 1,000 GPMs a minute with his setup.
Yeah.
And
And
it'll be interesting to see what ISO does with that.
And that flow rate's so dependent on where you're at and what your buildings are and all that. You know, being the fifth largest building in his district, the fifth largest building probably really isn't very big, right? There's some big ones there, but they're not. There's only a couple, so you get down that list pretty far, and all of a sudden the fifth largest building becomes a house.
I think the problem that he's going to run into though is that me and him talked about it is that he's got to have like 30 or 40,000 gallons of water.
Right.
And I mean, and like, that's a big swimming pool.
That's a big swimming pool.
Most people nowadays build wading pools or like a little one that you can do volleyball in. I mean, we're talking like 10 or 12, 15,000 gallons of water. So he's going to have people that's next door, and he's not willing to go the extra and do it like a MOU or anything with the people that say that, hey, you can get water at any time out of my pool to count towards his water, his static water on hand. He just has a form that, like, if the person's there and they're willing to let him get the water, then they can get the water. So it's like it's really not it's not there. It's like he knows it's there, but he doesn't know that if he can even access it or not.
Right.
Well, but now again, the pro and con of this is that he now has even a deeper avenue to see how much further down the rabbit hole he wants to fall.
Yeah.
Now I can guarantee you, ISO, if someone's pulling a stunt like that, ISO's gonna force them to demonstrate
to prove it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
the proverbial rubber meets the pavement at that point. Yeah. We'll see.
And somebody's going to have to accept the fact that you're draining their pool, right?
Right.
Obviously, you'll put it back, but there's a little bit of work and time and energy and effort that goes back into balancing the pool back to a balanced state. Plus, how good is it for that pool to be empty?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you hit it on a wet day and that pool floats, who's responsible for that?
Yeah, you're toast at that point. Yeah.
I mean, in most of your pools nowadays, you can't quick fill, you have to slow fill. So how long is that going to take?
So without going too far down the rabbit hole, for people that don't even know what ISO stands for, it's Insurance Standards Organization.
Yeah, I think it's the Insurance Service Organization.
Shame on us that we don't know the answer to that. It's ISO. It doesn't matter what the actual acronym stands for. What ISO is it is a graded score on your fire department's capability to tackle one event and only one event. And it is a working structure fire.
Yeah,
and
they don't care about your car wrecks or your medicals
or how awesome you are at your high diving rescue squad. It is strictly working fires and your response to toned out fires. So that's part of this when you're actually taking an ISO evaluation. And let's take a really, really small community, very rural, out in the middle of nowhere. You may not have had a working structure fire in the last 10 years. That's a problem because you're going to have a really hard time being evaluated at face value on that premise.
Well,
And
everything's theoretical.
right. And here's the kicker. The purpose of this podcast is I want people, particularly small departments out in the middle of nowhere, to actually consider getting an ISO evaluation and the actual benefits of getting that ISO evaluation, and ultimately how you use that score in your grade to your benefit.
Right. And even if you're in an unincorporated rural area and you're not rated, just the mere existence brings that to a 9.
Right. And what is the benefit of having your organization recognized?
Well, because your neighbors, for one, that you can be automatic aid, you can give automatic aid, you can receive automatic aid. Like if you're not rated, there's none of that counts anywhere.
Is there any
The
fiscal?
fiscal, yeah, the it's a bell curve, right?
Mhm.
You get to that non-rated, which would be the max, and as you go up the ladder and into a 9, 8, 7, 6, the insurance fire portion of the homeowners and property insurance rates decrease because of that rating. And the farther up that end, the bigger the decreases are. So there's a bigger jump from 10 to 9 than there is from 2 to 1, right? 2 to 1 is negligible and barely noticeable. By the time you get to the basically above 4, it's a bragging rights thing, right?
Three.
Three,
Three's the number.
three and above, you're to the bragging rights
Right.
stage of it. So
And a four, even a five. Let's say you're in a small town with an ISO rating of 5. That's good.
yeah,
Like that's not something to sit there and be like, oh, they're terrible. They're only an ISO 5. And that's one thing that I want to talk about real quick is just the different things that are being evaluated, because you could have the most star spangled awesome fire department on the face of the earth and still be an ISO 7
right.
or lower.
Yeah, because 40% of that's coming from water, right?
Right. So a big part of this is how you move water and how you flow water. And if you're in the city, it's your water infrastructure. And if you live in the county, it's going to be your ability to move water with your tankers. Now, another part of this is going to be your dispatch. Um, it in the grand total and scheme of things, dispatch does not score a mega amount of points,
Well, they're 10.
but they're important in the total score. Another one, and I actually have no clue how this works in the county, but particularly for a city, this is a real important scoring, is your fire marshal slash fire investigator slash building department. Um, what sort of codes they're having, how often are they doing annual inspections, school fire drills, are they documented, on and on. And it's also worth 10 points. And then at the end of the day, the fire department is worth 50.
Right. So
Um,
so if you've got and realize it goes from you start at 0, right? And then you start adding points in there. So everybody starts at 0 at the bottom and then all these points are added up. And so
I'm going to change
a
one thing
10
you
is a
just said.
90 and a 20 is a 80 and then on and on and on and on and up the scale.
Uh, go, yes, but think of it as you start at the bottom of the scale. You start at a 10 because a 10 represents zero fire service recognized.
Right.
Okay. And if you had the world's best dispatch and you got 10 points, well, that's going to move you up 10 points. In this case, it's going to move you to a 9. Let's say you had the world's best building inspector, another 10 points. So you've gained a cumulative total of 20 points, but what you've slid into is an ISO rating of 8.
Right.
That's
And you didn't do anything with the fire department
right.
at
You
that
haven't
point.
evaluated your city and you haven't evaluated your county flow rates and you haven't evaluated the fire department yet. So before you even started, you're theoretically already at an ISO 8. Um,
Which is going to be 20 or so percent better than being the non-rated or the 10.
right. Um, so without going full scale deep dive into the water, um, the total of 40 points available from your water, I want you to take that 40 points and I want you to break it out to probably 10 or 15 different categories. And here's the kicker: do not think of this as an all or nothing score. And this is true across the board for everything. Just because you only get 5 of 10 available points for that category in the water department does not mean that you're a colossal failure. The way this works is that you take all of these points and they have a cumulative score. Some of them are worth a lot more than others, but at the end of the day, when you truly get to the proverbial nut cutting, tenth of a point matters.
Right.
And it's okay to score what you can get and run with it, because those tenth of a points are what carry you from a 6 to a 5 or from an 8 to a 6. And taking that total score and again looking at way the insurance companies adjust their total value and scoring that local community on insurance standards can be an exponential factor, particularly on the bottom end. Going from a 9 to a 7, your homeowners are going to have a significant savings,
Right.
significance. Vice versa, going from a 2 to a 1, it's going to be minute.
Yeah. Hardly noticeable. But even though you don't have control over the pipes in the ground, right? We're the fire department, we're not the water department. There are things in the with the water that we can influence, right? So we,
Right.
as the fire department, we could have a hydrant testing program in-house that's outside of what the water department's doing. We could document hydrant testing and maintenance and some of these things as a department to help improve that water score,
Right.
which is kind of, you know, 40%'s a bird nest on the ground. So, if you're doing that part of it and you gain 10 or 15 points out of that, that's a big chunk.
Sure. And let's say you're a really small town. And let's say you only had a grand total of like 5 or 10 or 15 fire hydrants total. And you know that the city 300 years ago, when they put those hydrants in, they only put in a 2 or 3 inch water line to supply those hydrants. Okay. So you are going to get minimal scoring points for flow rate on the hydrant. But if you test and inspect the hydrants and you have the documented data for those testing and inspections, you're going to get full credit points for that portion of the score. So, just making up numbers, let's say that flow rate and testing and inspections are a grand total of 20 points. Well, you may only get 2 or 3 points of the 10 points available for flow, but you're going to get your full 10 points for the hydrant inspections and testing. So you actually scored 13.
Right.
So and that's the hard thing to convince people with the ISO is they say, "Oh, well, they haven't done this." Okay, one, you can start, and two, a lot of this is how good are you at your documentation and paperwork, because there's always a place to make up points on the back end,
Right.
and a lot of that's through your documentation.
So moving past the dispatch and the water and the things that we have limited control over,
Right.
right? So the one thing we do control is the fire department, right?
Sure.
So there's a myriad of things that go into this score. It's not just do you have enough engines to pump water, and it's not just how many miles it is from station to the jurisdiction boundaries. It's not any one of these things, and it all goes back to what Matt just said. Like it's pieces of points that you're getting that are adding up to the grand total. So there's some real low hanging fruit there that are pretty easy to get. One of which would be certifications, right?
And training.
And training.
Let's put those two things together because they're really one and the same. Um, Training. Here's the other part of it. It's got to be documented. I just realized that everything that we're about to talk about is always dependent upon your documentation. Uh, how critical, Gene, for you was the documentation of basically everything?
Oh, it's huge. Everything. We document everything at work. I mean, everything that we do at work, and that was able to. We were able to send that information back to ISO to prove that what we had done. So yeah, enormous.
And I know you guys being a one and kind of where you ride the training requirements like is way beyond what most volunteer departments are going to ever even consider as doable, right?
Oh yeah, I mean we're
So
crazy. I mean we're looking at you know close to 230 hours a year per individual.
per individual. And so that breaks into a bunch of different categories. It breaks into facility training. So that's training that you would do at a fire field somewhere, right? Some recognized fire training facility.
Now, one thing I want to pause real quick on is you're like, oh my God, we don't do 230 hours of training.
Yeah, but you might do 50.
Yeah, even 20.
Yeah.
It's still partial credit. Do not wig out on that. Just document it. And by 20, I'm not talking about department training. Like let's hope your volunteer fire department as a cumulative group has more than 20 hours total
Right.
for training.
What?
I'm talking individually.
I think it's back to the. I mean, I hate to use the word nickel and dime, but I mean, everything you're doing in the fire station is training. Are you checking trucks? Yes, that's apparatus for familiarization.
Our driver.
Did you drive somewhere to go look at something? Well, that's district familiarization. So I mean,
Yeah, our driver.
Yeah.
Do you have business meetings? That's officer development.
Yes.
Because what are you doing in that business meeting? Department stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Administratively, administrative functions of the department that the officers of the department do.
Yeah. So, and again, I want everyone if you listen to this whole podcast, I don't want you to sit there and be, for lack of better words, overwhelmed and sit there and say that we don't do that like them, so that it doesn't matter. We'll never get it. No, guys, again,
It does matter.
it does matter. I can really overly summarize an ISO evaluation. And the way I'm going to summarize this, it's going to sound like that it's not worth it. But if you're a community that's an ISO 10 or 9, you need to do this for your local property owners. If you're a 7 or 8 and you're not doing any of this, it's going to bring you to a 5 or 6. If you're a 5 or 6, quite frankly, pull together your documentation and just become a little more organized. And why don't you move up to a 3 or a 4?
Oh.
And in the process, save your local property owners anywhere between 1.5 and 3.5 multiplier insurance savings.
And what were y'all before y'all went 1? Were you sitting at a 2 for a while or
Oh, we were a 4.
4? So, a big jump is not out of the question, right? You
No.
can make those big leaps, even though for us we're chasing those tenths of a point and we're not going to see that big leap. but we've already made it past that big
Yeah,
leap point.
but if
right?
you're that department that's that 9 and you do the paperwork and you do everything and you can jump to a 5, maybe maybe the whether it's the citizens or council or whatever it is willing to do the tax increase to help you out to be able to buy more equipment or do something because you're able to save the citizens, more than that and just in tax dollar, in insurance savings, and that they're just wanting to roll a little bit of it back into tax dollars. So they're still seeing an offset, not as much as they would if you didn't raise taxes, but to still help
But
the department out.
it's all priorities too, right? So, maybe the like you say, the tax rate's not going down. Maybe it stays the same or goes up a little bit, but maybe they're seeing that savings on the back end through that insurance, and it's just at at some point, and the ISO rep was real good about saying, don't build your department to ISO. You don't want to do that, right?
Yeah. ISO is not going to determine your operational uh performance on scene. Like,
Or
don't.
what equipment you can afford or anything like that.
Yeah,
About
no.
the only time I would say that's maybe the case is, let's say you're real small rural volunteer fire department and you get your first engine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
No, now that's going to change your operational and it's going to change your ISO rating. But if you're used to operating, still the rural concept, but if you're used to operating typically with engines on scene and tankers, no, ISO is not going to affect your operational. Go ahead, Gene. You
No, I mean, I just think that it's the minimum. I mean, if you look at it, it's the minimum. I mean, nobody builds a house to minimum standards. An electrician doesn't wire a house to minimum standards. You're not going to want to do the minimum. You still want to go above and beyond.
Yeah, kind of a rat way I like to look at this is that what ISO does, like if you were building for an ISO review, what it does is it prepares, and the key word is prepare the station for a structure fire, prepare the firefighters for a structure fire, and prepare I'm going to say the municipality or county for the structure fire. But when they respond and the truck's moving and they're on scene, ISO at that point is negligible and not a factor,
Right.
because the key word here is response. That is what they're gauging. Your ability to respond, not perform on scene, but respond. And I again, I think it's real important to understand that we're not talking about fundamentally changing the operational capabilities in any aspect of the organization other than when you first introduce your engine.
Yeah. And sheer just documenting, right?
Right.
That's a big,
But
I
again,
wouldn't say a burden, but it's a necessary evil to have that documentation and be participating in the infers or the nears, which is coming
what you document has no
bearing on your operation.
bearing on operations.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just documenting what you're already doing.
And like I said, guys, we're so sorry. We're bouncing all over the place here. Um, so little tidbits of information for people. I always thought for you to get credit for a quote unquote engine that it was 1,000 GPMs.
Step 50.
Turns out it's not. It's 750.
Yeah.
So if you're a real rural fire department, if you have a tanker with more than 750 GPM pump, guess what? You get credit for an engine on it. Now, that's not quite.
You don't get full credit.
You don't
right?
get full credit for it because there's some tools and equipment that you have to have on that truck. And I don't want to do the deep dive on the tools and equipment.
That's out there. Anybody can look that.
Okay. But what I do want to highlight is that if you want an engine credit for a tanker, 750 GPMs and pump testing.
Right.
You got to have annual pump testing.
So to get full credit, you'll still get partial credit for that untested engine, but it's just going to be partial at that point, right?
Mhm.
So when you're buying that tanker and you've got the choice between the 500 GPM pump that's going to drive the cost on that truck, or for, let's just pick an arbitrary number and say for $10,000 more you can get a 1,000 GPM pump. Suddenly that 1,000 GPM pump has a lot more value to it because it is those additional points.
Right. And taking this exact concept, you can go to your city council, you can go to your county commissioners, you can go to your HOA, however you do your fundraisers, just through mailers and flyers. Tell them, we have a drive that we want to buy this. This is why, and this is how it affects you. The total price increase is $10,000 on this truck. Who would like to save in the community more than $10,000 on their insurance?
Yeah,
In a collective effort. There's no way the community doesn't support that. Period. I
right.
don't care how cash strapped the community is. I can guarantee if you're a really broke department, really broke organization, really broke county, really broke city, but you'd put the time, energy, and effort into explaining just this one purchase and why and what you plan on doing with it and how it impacts the community in the short and long run, they're going to buy it.
Yeah, and there's so many weird little caveats in there for tenths of a point here and tenths of a point
Mm-hmm.
there that, you know, without just diving totally down the rabbit hole to find them all, but there's stupid little stuff like, say you've got those 5 3-story buildings and you need that ladder truck. Well, guess what's partial credit for that? A 35-foot extension ladder,
Right.
right? I mean, how much money are we really talking about on a 35-foot extension ladder versus a $2 million ladder truck?
Wonder if we would have gotten partial credit for a reserve ladder if we'd had a reserve
Yes,
35 foot.
yes, yes. You'd have had to have it on something to get it there, but yeah, you'd have gotten partial credit. You can get partial credit for that.
Yeah. I mean,
So it falls into that service ladder kind of thing. But
that's a really good example of what we're talking about, where read the documents, understand the parameters at which you're working in, and don't be afraid to propose radical to the ISO rep,
yeah,
because they're going to sit there, they're going to blink their eyes, and they're going to be like, okay, where do you have a 35-foot reserve extension ladder? If you point to a brush truck with a 35-foot ladder hanging off of it, I'm telling you guys, that's going to qualify.
yeah,
Has it been tested? Because you'd probably have to test that particular ladder,
right.
even though ISO doesn't require ground ladder testing, because you're trying to get credit for it in the reserve ladder perspective. I'd go ahead and get that one tested.
Yeah, you may not get the whole half a point, but you'll get maybe a tenth.
Yeah, even if you got 0.05.
Yeah.
If you pulled a stunt like that, if anyone hears this and is divine inspired to try something that
Well, no,
radical,
I've done it.
have you?
Yeah,
So it does work.
it does work. Yeah, it is
Oh
a thing.
God. Yeah. No, that's
I've
awesome.
done it. Yeah.
How many points was it worth?
About a tenth.
That's awesome still.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you got to realize you got to take that half a point, break it into its 100% value. So you're getting 20% freebie for that.
For having a
That's
ground ladder that's
that
longer than the 24-foot that comes on the truck,
right.
basically.
Uh
So there's all these little caveats, and then we get into the things that, like, I explained a while ago. We're that true volunteer fire department in that true sense. We're not at the stations sleeping in bunks. We're responding to the station for the most part, even though we have a huge culture of hanging out at the stations, and there's lots of people there almost all the time. We're just not that department, right? We're not scheduled, we're not shifts. So we struggle with the staffing equation.
yeah, at face value. So this is where I'm going to go off into the weeds on this, and I don't I don't mean to, but unfortunately I have to. So, because we're true volunteer and because our membership is awesome and because they show up in force on calls, the quote unquote staffing equation isn't an equation for us because we have calls, the membership shows up, they kick ass, and they go run them. Unless you're wanting to try and get credit for it. Now, here's you're going to get really disappointed, and I'm telling you, don't. Okay. So, the question I would have to anyone trying to do this ISO equation, you're going to learn real quick that being volunteer, you're going to get Baby SEAL Club being volunteer. And it's a penalty. And I don't give a crap what anyone calls it. Uh, and it's a penalty that strictly affects volunteer and does not affect career. And what that penalty looks like is that if the department had 4 guys on staff and paid, you're going to get credit automatically, no questions asked, pass go, high five everyone, and you're going to get credit for those 4 guys. The problem for volunteer is that you won't. And what you have to be able to prove to get credit for your staffing, because it doesn't matter how often you cover calls, you have to document 8,736 hours of staffing time to get credit for that one individual. So, what does that mean? When I tell you that I have 18 individuals on average respond to a commercial structure fire, I get credit for 0 because they're not on duty.
Yeah, it's that duty hour still. But when are they on duty?
Training, business meetings, putting the truck back in service after calls, and all that time that your members theoretically and probably do spend on or
Or
spend at the station.
or just hanging out, right?
Right.
So we have that culture of people hanging out, and I've been shocked and Will in there at 9 o'clock at night, and there's 15 people there, and they've
Right.
been there for hours and hours and hours. Well, those 15 people times the 5 hours that they've been there, that's a chunk. That's a chunk of hours.
Yeah. And you get credit for it. And you're not in the habit of documenting it.
Yeah.
So without getting all preachy, I highly recommend that if you're one of those departments that after you run a call, you have people hang out at the station, because that's pretty universal. And they sit there and jabber with each other for 30 minutes, an hour, or hours afterwards. You need to figure out how to start capturing that time. If you're a department that has college kids on a volunteer department and they come to the station to just hang out and run calls, they're studying and running calls.
They
You
count.
you have got to capture that time. I can tell you for us, the math and the formulas and to pull this all together turns out to almost 35,000 hours. So you take 35,000 and you divide it by 8,736 and you get this magic number. Okay. And for the ease of life, I'm going to call it 4. Okay. You get credit for 4 staffing members as a volunteer organization, and you're going to get points for 4 people. So I would argue it's some of the lowest hanging fruit that we have is volunteer to try and get for ISO, but it's also some of the hardest to figure out how to report.
Right. Because you do have to have a paper trail on this. You can't just magically pull a number out of your rear end and declare it to be the number.
Right. Yeah,
It,
you
it
you can't have a department with 10 people and say that you did 85,000 hours.
hours because people had to live there 24/7.
Yeah,
And
for real.
and even if you get into the career departments, like where Gene works, I mean, if you look at what ISO considers fully staffed on an engine, that's 6, right?
Yeah.
And a ladder 6. And so with you guys running an engine and a ladder, I mean, there's not 12 guys on staff.
No, we've got 5. Good day 6.
Yeah. So they're 50%, they make up that difference in their automatic aid.
Which is garbage because we tried to get credit for that on the volunteer side and we can't.
Yeah. I think we can down the road, but I think it was a struggle this time, right?
Well, I think it's because our surrounding departments hadn't rated.
That's
That's a big part of it.
that's the end of this discussion. But yeah, that's the kicker is that all I'll say is it sure is lonely in the night. And if you go out and you're brave enough and you're crazy enough to go get your ISO rating, you need to make some good friends because you want to be able to go get your other neighboring departments ISO rated also. And you'll be shocked if you rate a 8 and your neighbor rates an 8 and that other neighbor rates a 7 and you get good at your paperwork and all of you challenge again at ISO, shockingly all of you are going to be a 6.
Yeah. If you
Because
work
it's
together.
because it's all about your buddies.
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta be inside that 5 miles from station to jurisdiction. Like you can't be 47 miles away. You can't be Terralingua and Alpine, right?
Right.
Doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. There is a limit to this. If we happen to have any listeners, and I don't know, East or Deep West Texas, or Alberta. Yeah. If your neighboring department is 14,000 miles away,
It
uh,
it's gonna be tough to make that help you.
yeah, that may be a little bit of a stretch. But that said, don't be afraid to add them to your paperwork
Right.
because you might be able to get credit for it. You never know how much your reserve ladder of zero point 0.1 points becomes valuable to everyone else. Because the irony in this, what they never actually stipulated is the distance for the reserve ladder. They
No,
just said
that one doesn't.
they just said they had to be an adjoining agency.
Yeah. That one doesn't have a distance requirement. So there's 8 million of these little caveats, and I think we should round back to the point and explain what Granbury has done and where we're expecting to be and what that looks like.
So I want to preface this by saying I think the ultimate goal for any volunteer fire department is to be a 3.
Right.
Okay.
I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah, I would too.
I think a 3, because you got to realize that a 3 is the pinnacle of residential fire protection. Okay. A 1 and 2 is your ability to cover industrial.
So the way, and I read a little deal about this. So kind of in that 3 and 4, that's what you're considered adequate, right? That's
Yes.
you're meeting the minimum standards, you're adequate.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you're above board.
Keep talking because I'm going to look up how many ISO 3 rated departments are in the US.
You become above the minimum, right? So that 321 is above the minimum standard. And you've achieved a level that puts you leaps and bounds ahead of everybody, that the vast majority, right? And Texas is a weird state because there's a bunch of little caveats and stuff that makes Texas unique, and there's a lot of ISO ones in Texas. Texas represents a large portion of them nationally. And so you get into the city centers where you're in the DFW Metroplex or the greater Austin or Houston or San Antonio areas where once there's 1 or 2 ones in a given area, then the rest of the departments are able to tag off of that and boost their ratings uh, kind of off the backs of their neighbors. And that's what we were talking about, that automatic aid. And that's true where you work,
Oh
right?
yeah, we wouldn't if it wasn't for automatic aid, we wouldn't be a 1, we'd be a 2.
Yeah, it's just, and there's countless cities like that that are surrounding you, right? you're working together in a cohesive plan for the benefit of everybody. So even with us, we have to work with our neighbors in a cohesive plan for the benefit of everybody, because we're going to hit the limit of what we can do on our own. And I would say we're almost there, right? We're
Yeah,
almost
we're
to that.
close.
We're getting close to that limit of what we can do on our own. And we're going to have to rely on those neighbors to kind of help us get to the next level if we can. And not guaranteeing that we can get to that next level. So going back into that automatic aid and all that, that's why that stuff's super important, because when you get to the point where I think we're at, and we're getting close to what we can do on our own, we've got to rely on those people to help us get to that next level. So, I think kind of owe it to the listeners to kind of explain where we're at and what we're trying to do, and what's achievable by a volunteer fire department.
Right. Now, there's like 14 things you said there, and all of them can be long discussions. The one thing I want to preface is that Granbury got its original ISO rating in 2000, and it was the first time the city was rated and the county was rated, and it was a group effort. And we got an ISO rating of 3, which is really good. Okay. Um, and a lot of, for lack of better words, think of the giant cogs in the machine started to spin. So the kicker now is that the one thing you can't do is revert. You can't go from a 3 to a 4, because I would argue at that point you have some pretty serious questions that need to be asked about the organization if that's why you reverted. But here's Granbury's kicker. They were a 3. So what didn't have to happen was a uh, discussion about trying to replace the volunteer fire department. And so what the city started to do was invest into the volunteer organization. And that's multiple chiefs, multiple city managers, multiple councils. And coming off of that investment, they kept dumping it into 2 major factors: the organization and city infrastructure. Now, fast forward to today. We're 24 years later. So I don't want this to sound melodramatic, but for us to reach an ISO rating of 2 took 20 years, 24 years of multiple councils, city managers, fire chiefs, department membership, and planning to reach that. Um, Now the one thing, kind of the kicker in this is that we had an ISO review in 2018, and we were rescheduled as a 3 again. And I couldn't believe that we were a 3, because we should have been a 2 then. Um, because we'd had our third station added. We had a second ladder truck added. We had another engine on the line. And to go from my perspective is to say, maybe we need to do, particularly as chief, we need to do a little better on paperwork.
And I think the paperwork was ultimately the thing that kind of stumped that, right?
Right. There's one program that I would tell everyone that you need to buy. It's called, and it's really practical. I would never buy this for ISO, but it helps with ISO exponentially. And it's called Flow MSP. It's an app. Well, it's a subscription service that you buy into. It's web based. Really, really long story short, it you can go in and survey whatever you determine in your city. So in our case, commercial structures. The firefighters can go there. They can pre-plan annually and start entering a whole bunch of data about these structures. One thing we do is we add our tier 2 reports to it. And the best thing about this critter is that when a call's toned out, the each member is sent a notice that you have X call at this address. And if it's a working commercial fire, the pre-plan's right at your fingertips. So yes, that was purchased to help the membership, and it had a gigantic effect in aiding in ISO. But again, it was never purchased with the intent of aiding ISO. I just realized that it could significantly help in ISO. But that one app, God, I'm gonna probably lie to everyone. I think the total price we pay a year is $1,800, and that thing is worth more than that. And I'll just leave it at that, just in case an MSP rep's listening to
Yeah.
this. I'll just say that it's worth more than that. Because of the benefit and the practical benefit and the service that it provides to the community. Um, the other thing that can't go unacknowledged, particularly with the two men that are in front of me, is the time, energy, and effort that they dedicated in the last 4 years in training and finishing out the fine touches of training and being able to not only train, not only train adequately, not only train routinely, but train to a level that accurately represents the organization's time, energy, and effort to how we perform on scene. And realistically, city council doesn't really care if you had 3,500 hours of training on the organization last year. That's the same as 1,500 hours. The number doesn't translate for them. But to be able to give credit to that 3,500 hours of training and what that meant for ISO um, is critical. And the other compounding factor on this is trying to figure out the on duty factor. And all of these things add up to not only a score of ISO 2, not only are we at somewhere between an 80 or 90, but depending on that final score, we might be able to legitimately even push higher.
Yeah, and realize we had this reviewed a week ago, so we won't have the true actual documentation and all that until probably about December, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't a wham bam fast thing. Like we still have work to do. We still have stuff that we need to turn in and uh, produce some documentation for some different things, but the bulk of it's done, right? And you get past that bulk of it, and now we're to the pieces of points and the
Right. And the ultimate question is we've just said that an ISO 3 is fantastic for volunteer. If you're a true volunteer department and you have an ISO 3, you need to have like challenge coins made with that. You need to brag about it. You need to tell everyone how star spangled awesome you are. You need to do that also with a 4. And I would argue you probably ought to consider it with a 5. Those are really good ratings for a true volunteer department. Okay. For us to be able to push to a 2, a lot of it has to do with the city's investment into the organization. And I can't overemphasize that because a colossal amount of time, energy has to be dedicated by the city to upgrade the city water infrastructure, a new station, the apparatus required. And these are not cheap things. And the, I'm going to argue, commitment to being volunteer and to be able to ultimately say, hey, there's actually a legitimate chance we can be an ISO 2, maybe higher. I don't know how much better we can get at paperwork, but I would argue it's interesting. The only thing that's lacking on this organization is our ability to document our on duty time. because I can tell you everything on the fire side: stations, apparatus, testing, maintenance, inspections, uh, the rotation of the equipment. It's all there. It's all there. The MOUs for the reserve ladder, it's there. Our automatic aid is there. The membership are meeting the standard for even what ISO wants. And the only last thing that's our proverbial barrier to entry, because that's a word we use a lot, is how well can we figure out how to track our on duty hours, the time that people are hanging out at the station.
And realize to do that without fundamentally changing
The organization.
the organization in its entirety, right?
And
And you're sitting out there in listener land and you're like, well, just hire some people. Well, that fundamentally changes the
yeah,
organization.
we don't want to. We want to be volunteer, damn it. And I want to prove to you that being a volunteer organization can provide the pinnacle of service to your community. It is possible. It's not
Easy.
It's not, yeah, not easy. Go ahead, Gene,
Yeah,
because
no,
I
I mean,
can
we're
tell
the
you're shaking.
no, I mean, we're the unicorn. I mean, we are the unicorn. I mean, we have multiple stations. We have a lot of folks. We have a drill field facility for live fire. I mean, there's career departments that don't have multiple stations. A drill field facility. They, there's career departments that run half the calls that we run. So,
Right.
I mean, we're just the unicorn of it all.
Yeah. And it's, I don't know. It's just, I get kind of misty eyed about it because what we're talking about is so non standard worldwide discussion on volunteerism, and that it's dead, and that volunteers just try hard and we're only doing what we have to do, and the next generation's just useless, and on and on and on.
The whole bless their heart thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
Right.
I just think it's comical that volunteerism is dead. It's not dead. I think maybe the organization ruined it and caused the problem, but it's not dead. But I mean, when we have career departments renting our facilities to use our drill field so that they can train, that to me that says something.
Yeah. They're real small organizations called Lockheed Martin. Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Just think about that.
I mean-
If you're still listening at this point, understand Lockheed Martin trains at our facility.
well, I mean, Weatherford came last week
Yeah.
or the week
Or
before.
a couple weeks ago, yeah.
Four fire station, 4-station department, career department.
Yeah.
Down here at the volunteer place.
Training. And wanting some, we're there. I mean, I was there 2 days in a row helping them facilitate their training and being the tour guide for the training and building relationships.
I mean, we're hosting training events for one of the local largest college training facilities in the state of Texas.
Right.
Probably the second largest. Yeah.
Well, well, I mean, that's what I said. One of the largest, the second largest to A&M. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We're
without a
hosting.
doubt.
Yeah. It just, the one thing that, like I said, I want to pay homage and due diligence and respect to all the men before me and the membership. And again, it's not just one person, the city, the management council, chiefs, captains, on and on and on, assistant chiefs, everyone. It took so much to be able to get to this point, but that's the kicker. And that's what I'm highlighting is that there's one weird little organization out there that just said, well, that's what the news says, but that's not the standard,
Right.
because we've just managed magically to have an organization that's existed since 1907 that's always set another foot forward. And we don't sit there and look back and be like, well, that was good back then. That was pinnacle. 1962. That was the best it could be. It's not.
No, there's always tomorrow and there's always
Yeah.
better, right? I and I've said this several times. Like, we're not bringing this on this show to boast and brag. Like, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to round us up a herd of unicorns.
Right.
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help inspire and give information that's beneficial, that will help some other department somewhere realize that the stigmas that should be holding you, or that could be holding you back, are no reason to hold back, right?
Right.
Go for it.
And particularly on this discussion, I'm telling you, if you haven't done an ISO review, I'm dead serious. You ought to consider it. You ought to do it. And here's why: because it benefits your community. And if you do something that benefits your community, you turn around and you go right back to your local political critters and you say, look at us. We benefited you. And this is how we benefited you. And we could have done a lot better if we'd had X, Y, and Z, and maybe supplement us here and look about that. These are little things. Pump testing's not that expensive. Hose testing's not that expensive.
It's even cheaper to train somebody to do it.
Right. And if you have a community of, I'm making up numbers here, let's say you're rural, you have 5,000 people, okay? Maybe it's less, 1,000 people total, okay? But you have a good opportunity. You've always run tankers and brush trucks, but by God, you have the opportunity to buy a good, cheap, used engine. I know of a department that bought a fantastic piece of apparatus for $5,000. Yes, after COVID. It is possible. Okay. You get off your ass and you actually go to work and you go look for the truck and you'll find it. And they bought a gem of a piece of apparatus. Okay. And they finally have an engine and you get that thing pump tested and you get the hose testing done on it. And all of a sudden you literally go from no rating to a 9 or 8. Okay. And you turn around and you tell all your local community participants and the people that live there and on, and you tell them, like, look, this is just how much I saved you on insurance. You turn around and you contact your dang insurance company and you make sure they know. Okay. Tell them to contact us.
Yeah. That that it's a never-ending road of growth and benefit, right?
Right.
And I going back into the not boasting and trying to inspire and all that. I know that you're out beating the streets with your job, and you're going to a lot of departments, and you're having these conversations with chiefs that are running the gamut from career to volunteer to everything in between, and some pretty decent departments. And one of the things, and Matt's going to be all oh shucks about this, but he literally gets kudos from big city departments telling him, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, it's real funny when I visit with them and we're talking about big, big departments. And Granbury's always just, it's different. It has a notoriety. We're going to call it, there's just this weird connotation with the department. And it's not that anyone knows it, but they know of it. And they'll ask a question, and it may be, when are you going paid? Or how do you do it? Or what do you look like today? Or what are you doing now? And it's a variation across all entities across the board. And it's interesting to have these discussions because some of them are, I would argue, are posed adversarial. Some of them are posed from people not knowing,
And
and they
some are just genuine curiosity.
genuine, like, how on earth are you doing it? And it's, to sum it all up, the we don't want to be associated with the classic stigma of, oh, you're volunteer. It's the other statement of, yeah, and they're volunteer. I had that conversation today.
Yeah.
I had that conversation today where they're like, yeah, they're a career department. We're running half of what they are. Their volunteer staff is literally 4 or 5 times our staff. And why are they not struggling when we are? Because that's a real common theme. It's real simple, real common to hear the generational gap argument. That's a real common statement. Uh, Kids don't want to do what we did. Uh,
Kinda.
they just don't want to do it the way you did it. And let's be real frank. I mean, if you really want to digest what the difference, fact of the matter is that 30 years ago when you were a rookie, you got treated like absolute crap. And they don't want to be treated that way. The other difference is pay scale.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have the generational gap here, and we have the young folks or the young kids or whatever it is that you want to call them. But I think the thing that helps us out that doesn't help the other people out is that we just sheer run the amount of calls.
Sure.
I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, there is death and mayhem that happens down here. I mean, there is death, mayhem, and fires.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's the Wild West down here.
I mean, it is like,
and we advertise and recruit off of that.
oh yeah. I mean, there's kids down here that's volunteered for a year that's made more work in fires in a year than I got guys at work that's been on the job for 5 years or 7 years. So,
Yeah. I mean, it's not a fair comparison at all because I've been chief now for 4 going on 5 years. And I I looked, and this was several years ago, before I was even chief, at what my total call volume was. It was a huge number. Total structure fire call volume
yeah.
was gigantic.
Oh yeah.
I was already well over 1,500 fires. And the vast majority of that, various levels of interior attack. Don't get me wrong, you're going to show up. Some of these are going to already be extreme defensive. But this was years ago, and I was already on 1,500, pushing 2,000 structure fires.
Oh, my first year I was here, I remember that November. I mean, I made 9 working structure fires just the month of November. And that wasn't even all the structure fires that we made.
Yeah.
It's just that's the ones that I made. I mean, that's probably if you took everybody where I work and added all their structure fires together for the year, they didn't make that many structure fires. Like
Right.
total, like took everybody and just added it all together.
And that's something that we do. We recruit, we advertise. It goes into getting our young men and women ready to go into the Metroplex and be like, look, fact of the matter is you're going to come here and get a ton of experience.
Oh yeah. I mean when one of the I guess in the Metroplex, I'm going to say they're the third largest department in the Metroplex, calls and says, "Hey, make sure you're sending us your people to test." I mean, I think it says something
Mm-hmm.
because they know.
Yeah, I have had that discussion with other bona fide, very large, very legitimate, serious, aggressive, big. I can't overemphasize like legitimate career fire departments, legit. And I feel like a schmuck because I didn't know who was calling me, and it took me too long to realize who was calling me. But he was asking how many firefighters I had in the testing and ready to hire phase. And yeah. And meanwhile, we're I don't know, we're at what, 85, 87. We're in
Total.
the 80s. We'll call it 80 members. This year we've had, I don't know, 35 applicants now.
Yeah.
I'll go on the low side and say 30.
And we've captured probably a dozen.
Yeah.
And you lose some to backgrounds and you lose some to whatever.
Sure. Well, and then the other part of this is they were here for a few years and their career started.
Yeah.
Go forth and conquer. Because again, this is one of the
Oh.
biggest things we can champion is our young men and women that join our organization and go start their career and ultimately leave, and maybe they even move, and they go forth and have their careers. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm going to just say this. I'm meeting my obligation to the fire service. Gene, you're meeting the obligation to the fire service. Jesse, you're meeting the obligation to the fire service.
Yeah.
Jesus, I don't know how much more that we can actually do to meet our obligations.
My dad, 40-year plus volunteer, over 20 years as the chief of the department where he was at. And that was the highlight of his time, was to be able to say that he has guys that are company officers in large metroplex departments.
Right.
Not, I had a guy that got hired at Podunk that's got 2 dudes total. And I mean, he's got guys that are chief officers in major metropolitan departments: Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington. I mean, how many volunteer departments can say that that's where their guys are at?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That started out as kids coming in,
Yeah.
in high school, or 16, 17, 18 years old, and that's where they're at now.
Yeah. It's, and this is probably the easiest and roundest way to say how did 100% volunteer non-ESD, no paid staff volunteer department hit an ISO 2? The last 10 minutes of discussion. That's how we did it. Because there's a bunch of people committed to the organization, what we're doing for a service point of view, and quite frankly, going out and actually, God forbid, having fun and enjoying what you're doing, and being able to sit there and know that you're going to lose people and smile and slap them on the back and say, go get them.
Oh, yeah.
Get it
for
done. Like, by God, yes, we'll get the next one on deck for you.
I mean, we got departments that surround us that's got less members on their total department than we've got showing up on calls.
Right.
I mean, fire alarm, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 14 people show up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, it's bragging. It's special. It's unique. And the fact of the matter is it's not impossible, because just to try and make this a little more full circle, there's not many, but there is other departments in Texas that sat there and said, oh, you're volunteer. Just keep trying. You do the best until you can, until you get your ESD in place. Or you can be those few departments out there that embrace the suck, said, damn it, we're going to do better, and then do it.
Yeah. And that's the easiest part, right?
I would argue it is.
Yeah. Just doing the better.
If you look at the definition of professionalism,
has nothing to do with pay.
It has zero to do with pay. There is not, the word pay is not in the definition for professionalism.
Yeah.
Not even a little bit.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I'll give credit to is training. I mean,
it's the key to the whole thing.
I would argue that none of it's possible without the training. I mean, the training's just the key. It's the cornerstone. It's the heartstrings. It is everything. And the last thing I'll add is, don't think you're going to do it in 6 months.
No,
it's not. It's a long-term investment. Realize that it may require multiple admins, multiple officers, multiple mayors, multiple city councils, multiple commissioners,
and perseverance, right?
Well,
right.
I think it all points back to, we've been doing it and growing it since 1907.
Right.
Not 2000. Not last year, not last month.
Yeah, I mean,
volunteer since 1907.
The first time that the city of Granbury decided to start supplementing the volunteer department, and it was nothing. Of course, the city was broke back then too. Was started in the 70s, the
Yeah.
mid 70s.
Well, but they were also providing apparatus and doing stuff some before then, but even way back when, in the starts of it, I mean, I don't think it's 115, 16 year trek to get somewhere, right?
No, I don't. But I think to give yourself a 2 or 5 year window
And
to
even if
look at
it's
this
10,
equation to start,
yeah,
because again, there's just certain pieces you got to get in place: testing, inspections, maintenance, apparatus,
people,
training. Hell, the bare minimum for the documentation requirements 3 years across the board. So, I mean, if you want to be cute, we can call it 36 months just to start.
yep,
So, I we've gone all over the place on this. I want to overemphasize that even if you're a small rural department or you're a really small city department and you're 100% volunteer, there's no reason to sit there and not try and take a serious look at ISO and what it can do for you and where it can take you. I would argue that the smaller you are, the actual easier that it is. And there's a lot of truth in that, because if you're a real small community, you might be able to be shocked at what you could do with just one engine.
yep. Well, I think that's a good wrapping point for that. I do want to remind everybody that we will be live at the SFFMA convention on the 29th at 8 a.m. So if you're down in San Marcos this year at the Texas State Firemen Fire Marshal Association convention, come see us. Uh, we'll be doing a live podcast from the convention. It is a breakout session. Uh, will count as training. Believe it or not, this is training. Uh,
If I remember correctly, it's even multi-state, right?
yeah, I think we're still working with Louisiana, and they're going to be rebroadcasting that on a Zoom call for the Louisiana folks. But uh, it's honor, privilege to get to do this stuff. Uh, there's actually two different classes from members of our department. There's another class with our chaplains doing a chaplaincy class. I believe he's on Friday, but so we're taking an active role to help better the fire service in general, uh, from our standpoint, through our department and through our contacts and everything that we're doing. Uh, Matt, you want to plug your article that's coming out on NVFC?
Oh, shucks. Uh, just like this podcast, uh, people, I know everyone will think we're lying, but when me and Jesse sat down and said, I don't even know how the conversation started.
Listen,
I think it was something retarded. Like, uh, I think there's 10 steps that people need to follow for fixing a volunteer department and actually reversing the trend and getting it to progress. And I'm not kidding. I pulled out an envelope, a used envelope, and just started writing on the back of it. And about 4 minutes later, we came up with 12 things. And I sat down and wrote an article on the NVFC Voices forum. And that crazy thing got so much traction. It was funny and ludicrous. Um, and that article off of NVFC Voices is going to be published. It is published. It's just not been released yet. And their by no twice annual publication, Firefighters Strong, and then whenever they release their newsletter with it also. Um, and it just highlights some things that you can do as a volunteer to help try and tack down some of the issues you have with your organization. There's no magnificent insight here. Training. Everything else in that article, training.
Yeah.
That's how you fix it. That's how you address it. That's how you make yourself better. Training. And if you get training nailed down, shockingly, everything else going to fall right into place.
Yep. Well, as always, got to reach out to us.
Yep, you can always find us there and shoot us questions, concerns, comments, particularly if you're interested in ISO, because two of us are actually all brushed up on this right now. Shoot us an email there on ittasteslikeburningcast@gmail.com. And you can find us on Twitter at ITLBcast. You can, if you feel frosty and you like stickers, you can find us on It Tastes Like Burning on Patreon. And arguably, I would request that if you're even remotely available for the SFFMA convention this weekend, not this weekend, but June 27th, 8th, and 9th.
Yeah, we're live the 29th.
We're live the 29th. I would ask you to actually come on down and
thanks to
find us.
Gene for sitting here and
Oh yeah.
Humoring us.
Yeah,
Jesse, you got anything else?
that's it.
Gene?
No, I'm good.
All righty. This is Matt.
This is Jesse.
Thank you.